Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ty, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, Combat Unemployment Fraud in Today's Workplace. This event is being presented by HR Morning and is being sponsored by PayPro. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in the control panel. If they're regarding the subject being presented, I'll add them to the queue for questions at the end. Now I'd like to introduce your speakers, Dr. James Castanera and Leo Castanera.
Okay, Ty, thanks very much. This is Jim Castanera speaking to you, and I've got my brother on the other line. And if you've read our bios, good morning, Leo. And if you've read our bios, you know that he's a banker. He's vice president of security and also BSA at his mid-sized community bank in central Pennsylvania, and has been doing that for what, 15, 16 years, Leo, I think?
Yeah, a little more, actually.
Yeah, boy, time flies when you're having fun, and you've been having fun lately. And I spent some 10 years with the law firm of Saul Ewing, Arnstein and Lair, a major Philadelphia law firm, and did a lot of unemployment stuff with them. And so we bring a lot of experience to you, and we're going to cover an agenda that's, for an hour's worth, I think is pretty ambitious, but I think we'll give you a good overview of the terrain here that we're dealing with and how we're trying to deal with it and how you might be able to deal with it best. So you notice there are 5 bullet points, and that last one is going to be the one that is going to be most, I guess, most apropos. We'll spend the most time on that, giving you some best practices and some ideas on how to proceed. But I think before we do that, we've got to kind of build the context so that we all understand what's really going on here. And the American Rescue Plan Act, of course, is a major consideration. I don't think any of us would probably be, or we probably, if you're an HR compliance officer, if you're an HR professional, you've probably been dealing with unemployment comp for a long time. But it's the American Rescue Plan Act that makes this kind of an acute issue right now. What is the act? Well, I don't know about you, but I've lost track of how many rescue acts there have been since the pandemic began more than a year ago. I think this is at least federal law number 5, if not 6. It's certainly the most robust at 1.9 million. It reminds me of my childhood days when Everett Dirksen was a senator from Illinois, and he was fond of saying, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and all of a sudden you're talking about real money. And my gosh, now it's $1 trillion here or $1 trillion there, and we really are talking about some real money. If I go to my next slide here, you can see what the Rescue Plan Act is doing in terms of unemployment compensation. And you may recall that the predecessor CARES Act was providing $600 a week maximum in terms of topping up the state's unemployment benefits to the millions of unemployed Americans who have been applying for benefits over the past 12 or 13 months. And, we kind of have a perfect storm here because we have lots and lots of money around. We have extreme need out there among millions of Americans, nothing like it probably since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And we have lots of pressure on state and local agencies as well as the Fed to get that money distributed. So it's the worst possible kind of situation, or the best possible if you happen to be a fraudster. So with that little background on the Rescue Plan Act, let's talk about what kinds of unemployment fraud really are going on out there these days. And I'll kind of Leo and I have put together here just a brief list of the most common kinds of UC fraud. And in terms of claimant fraud, the first 3 bullet points are the obvious ones, and they're not unusual. If you are an HR professional, I'm sure you're familiar with these kinds of things that can come up. Unemployment compensation is usually not available if you fire somebody for willful misconduct or if they abandon the job. It can get a little gray or a little funky if we talk about things like chronic absenteeism. Some state regimes, unemployment comp regimes, consider absenteeism to be a kind of a no-fault thing, and the employees who are fired for excessive absenteeism do get their benefits. In other states, absenteeism is kind of put on the shoulders of the employee and they're denied, or there's a hearing and then the referee decides, is it one or is it the other? Is it the employee's fault, or is it absenteeism due to no fault, and so forth. All of this kind of in the mix of who is entitled to unemployment compensation, when they're entitled to it, and how much. And of course, a lot of states don't disqualify employees 100%. So an employee may have been fired for willful misconduct, may have abandoned the job or what have you, and that may disqualify the employee for 4 or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And then if they're still not reemployed, they begin to get some form of benefit. So it's a 50-state system. You have to really understand the system where you are doing business, or multiple systems if you're a multi-state organization. And there usually are multiple steps in the awarding or denial process. So if someone is terminated from your organization and you get an inquiry from the agency letting you know that she has applied for unemployment comp, and you fill out the form and say, yeah, we had to let her go, it's a layoff, or what. Well, of course, there were millions and millions of layoffs in the past year. That's pretty much it. On the other hand, if you write back and say, we fired this individual for willful misconduct, or we consider that she is guilty of a job abandonment, then it's a little bit different story, isn't it? Then we may end up being in the process of having a referee's hearing and even going beyond that. And I'll expand upon that a little further on when it's probably more appropriate. Right now, let me just touch upon the first 3 bullet points here and say that common types of UC fraud that are done by the employee or former employee include submitting false information in order to get benefits, collecting benefits after one has become ineligible. So somebody is eligible for benefits, finds a new job, doesn't quite get around to letting the agency know that they are no longer eligible for those benefits. We're not reporting other kinds of wages or income while the collecting of those benefits was going on. So someone who's kind of out there doing, maybe someone who is in construction, is unemployed, is collecting benefits, but's also out there operating as an independent contractor, collecting fees or wages in one form or another and not reporting that. Those are the first 3 bullet points. And those, we're all of us HR people are well aware of those. The 4th one is a little different, and this is really more the area of our concern today. And that is to say, when, because of identity theft, an innocent employee or former employee is involved, somehow caught up in the fraudster collecting those benefits. So the employee herself is not collecting any benefits, and the employee herself is probably not guilty of anything more than possibly some negligent behavior, which is often implicated with identity theft. So let's go to our next slide here and look at what some of the most common schemes are. And Leo, when I look at our slide here and I see telling individuals they've won a contest or they've won a cash prize, that's really nothing new, is it?
No, this has been going on for decades. It's just that technology has gotten better. Instead of getting faxes at work, employees getting them, or individuals even at home would come in faxes. Now you get, the contest that you're winning. Won a cash prize, the lottery contest, which was basically started in Nigeria, but jumped to the UK and various other countries as Australia and Canada. This is all very common, Jim. What they're doing now, I'll touch base on later on in the presentation on the concerning what they're using now for unemployment theft. Okay, and then we have 3 bullet points here that really are oriented toward unemployment compensation. So telling someone you're eligible for a monetary award if you apply for benefits. You'll get some kind of extra award
by getting involved in claiming your benefits. Or we've got a faster way for you to apply, so you don't have to go through the normal process. We're going to help you apply and get those benefits into your mailbox, into your bank account more quickly. Or here's an app you can use in order to help you to apply for benefits. And I know, as I said, Leo handles security at his bank for his it's a 12 or 13 branch bank system, and he's seen it all. And it's amazing. Put a little bit of greed and a little bit of ignorance together, and you've got kind of a fatal formula for the customer or the client of the bank to be defrauded. So let's take a look at some of what's going on here. I put up here on the screen a pandemic unemployment assistance fraud alert from the UC system for the state of Pennsylvania, our home state. And what I want to point out here, if you go to the center of that quotation, the third line, notice that as Leo suggested just a moment ago, these fraudsters are not limiting themselves. Back in the day, all they really had to use was the telephone and the fax machine. And my gosh, I can't even think when the last time was I sent a fax. Now they have social media platforms. They've got text messaging. They've got email, so they can do spear phishing via email. And just quickly, a definition of spear phishing, the idea of the spear or the pinpoint. They're shooting something to an individual, and it's really tailored for that individual. That's part of that sophistication that Leo referred to a little while ago. So what is the extent of fraud? Well, you gotta say, even I have to admit, in a kind of cynical or perverse way, I guess, cynical lawyer that I am. But I look at this next slide on extent of frauds, and I see that some individual, and I assume that individual is now part of the criminal justice system, whether convicted yet or not, I don't know. But first of all, pretty ambitious to have applied to 40 different state agencies for unemployment comp. And what's really sad and scary about this was successful in collecting some $200,000 plus from 29 of those jurisdictions. Pretty scary stuff when you think about it. And as one watchdog agency pointed out, billions of dollars have apparently been distributed in fraudulent payments of unemployment compensation just last year, and no doubt we're facing the same kind of situation this year, and thus we have come together today to see what we can do about it. So let's go, first of all, into what the states are doing to combat UC fraud. And one example, again, I'll go to my own Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry, and notice that cross-matching with other agencies and other organizations is really kind of crucial. And then working with our Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor, did pump on, here's from our friend, the late great Senator Everett Dirksen again, $100 million just to fund some state efforts to combat fraud. Gives you some sense if it's worth investing $100 million of Uncle Sam's dollars. Of course, he prints them pretty fast these days, but nevertheless, if there's $100 million to be spent here, it gives you some feel for what the extent of the fraud is that is being combated here. Let's see what some of the states are doing. So I'll go to Colorado first. And they've got an 18-measure trigger approach to detecting fraud. And understandably, as this paragraph indicates, they're not telling us exactly what those 18 trigger points are. We could probably guess half or more of them, couldn't we? I think if we thought about it for a few minutes. And they're not telling us how many of those trigger points have to be triggered in order for the state for the individual applicant to pop up as someone the state ought to be taking a closer look at. But this is, I think, a pretty common way to be approaching our problem is to have some metrics that when those metrics or some trigger level, some minimum level of those metrics are touched, then it sends up a red flag. It lets us know that there's something possibly going on here. It's not a guarantee that we've identified fraud, but it tells us we have to take a closer look. We may be dealing with fraud. So I think Colorado gives us kind of a good idea here of an approach that we're able to take. Here's Idaho, and I think what's caught my eye about Idaho was that when they have indicators that flag possible identity theft, they've been getting positive hits on almost half of those flags. So, it's a 45% hit rate. So the red flag comes up, as would be the case also with Colorado. And that's not a guarantee that anybody's doing anything wrong. That doesn't mean anybody is guilty of anything. It means we've got to take a closer look. But the reason I include Idaho here is for that number 45%, because I think that's a very worthwhile number for us to be noting here. That tells us that when you do flag possible fraud, the chances that you are going to encounter actual fraud run at about 50-50, about 1 out of 2. So it tells me a couple of things. It tells me, number one, that it's worthwhile for the states and possibly for companies as well to be looking for fraud. If you fish for fraud, you're going to catch some fish. You are going to find out that there is fraud going on here. That's what that figure tells me. Take a little look here at another one. Here's Kansas. They have a reportfraud.ks.gov site for reporting fraud. I think that's another good thing. I'm guessing for many of your organizations, especially those of you who are joining us today from the for-profit arena, I'm sure you have under various federal laws that require it. You very likely have the Dodd-Frank Act, for example. You very likely have a anonymous reporting system on your website. Some people, there are very different names for it, but what it does is it allows someone, typically an employee, or it could be a vendor, it could be a client, customer, who knows, to file a report anonymously and let you know that something illegal is going on. And certainly that's useful in terms of detecting any kind of unemployment compensation fraud that might be occurring. And it's interesting, I've noticed over the years that, a lot of people actually resent the fact that someone is defrauding the state by collecting unemployment comp that they're not entitled to. So it's not unusual for someone to actually report that my neighbor is working, but also collecting unemployment comp, or is working and collecting workers' comp. That happens often enough. What you can see here is an example of a state having a reporting touch point where really anyone, a victim of unemployment comp fraud, an employer, and obviously someone, the next door neighbor of a fraudster who's collecting unemployment comp and should not be collecting it. And you notice when in their effort with trolling through this website, they claim to have blocked 45,000 fraudulent payments. So I think one of the things that I've seen over the past year, and I've been following this whole COVID situation from many, many angles. I've probably done, I don't know, perhaps as many as 50 webinars in the past year involving COVID-19 in one aspect or another, mostly HR stuff. And what I'm seeing is that we're all getting smarter. So with the first few rounds of benefits that came out last year, what we, especially under the CARES Act, I think we saw a lot of money going to the wrong places and the wrong people because, as I say, it was that perfect storm. A lot of need, a lot of birdies' mouths, in the nest, flopping back and forth, open, the little peeps open, wanting to get those worms. A lot of money there, a lot of worms in the system, and a lot of fraudsters out there more than happy to try to get their unfair share of it. So, with respect to that, I think that what we saw was a lot of money went to the wrong places. And then, with this new round of funding now, I think the Fed has gotten smarter. I think the states have gotten smarter. I think all of us as employers have also gotten quite a bit smarter. Take a look at Montana, and I included Montana because I think this points up some interesting factors as well. notice that what they are dealing with here that I pulled out as a particular focal point for comment here is that they're working with the Montana Board of Realty Regulation and the Montana Association of Realtors. And what this tells me is, and this is really, I think, an interesting point. Many times when we think about computer fraud, we're thinking about everything happening out there in the virtual world. And the reality is that many times frauds that occur are a combination of the virtual world and the physical world. And Leo, I'm thinking now, like we've done some webinars on ATMs, right?
Yeah, yes, we have.
And yeah, and many times there's a physical attack component to an ATM fraud. Am I right?
That is correct. They attack and slam the ATMs, take as much money as possible out of the ATM. I've seen ATMs compromised for as much as $50,000 to $80,000 in one shot, depending on the size of the bank and the money in those particular ATMs.
And so, when we talk about unemployment comp, one of the things that obviously some of these fraudsters are doing is they will find a house that is unoccupied, that's on the real estate market. They may find out who was the owner of that house, or they may claim to be the owner, and then apply for unemployment compensation. And the money comes in the form of a check and gets delivered to the mailbox. And the fraudsters have to then be watching these properties in order to see when a delivery occurs, get to the mailbox before the realtor or anybody else might check that mailbox and get those checks. So many times there will be a physical aspect, and that physical aspect can come into your workplace as well, with the theft of a thumb drive or the theft of a device like a tablet or a phone or what have you, or just someone who has access to one of your facilities, and then you've got employees who foolishly put their passwords on a sticky note on their computer or in some other way make things available, but never overlook the possibility of fraud involving some physical aspect, some physical presence of the fraudster in your organization. And then I'm going to finish off here with South Carolina, which seems to be working pretty hard on attacking fraud. Seems to have had some fair amount of success. And notice in the last bullet point there, we implemented ID identification systems using Integrity Data Hub. And I want to, before we leave the states behind, and I turn this over to my brother to talk about banks and what they're doing, I want to mention Integrity Data Hub. And I can't promise you that this is something you're going to be able to participate in. I've done the best to get some information on this, but I'm going to just bring it to your attention. The organization is called the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. And if you notice the quotation that I've reproduced here, they talk about the possibility of having affiliates. And it is really a very reasonable price per year if you want to be an affiliate. They give a number of examples here. Career centers, economic development organizations, community colleges, employment research organizations, workforce trainers, consultant centers. It's pretty broad. So this is one organization that you might want to take a look at. I really did explore the website. Frankly, I didn't call them up, but I did explore the website, and I couldn't find any comprehensive list of who can be an affiliate, but enough examples were given on this website that I suspect that it's possible that if you found this to be a worthwhile organization for you to join for $3,000 a year, it might be well worth it. And that takes us to the Integrity Data Hub that they're running here. This is one of, from what I can understand from my research, this is one of the most robust cross-checking operations that is going on in the United States right now. And an increasing number of states are participating in this. And so, again, cross-checking, I think, is one of the key ways that the states are managing to put something of a lid on this unemployment compensation fraud that we identified earlier as being so enormous, so vast that the DOL would spend $100 million fighting it. and we're really talking about fraud in terms of billions of dollars. And the reason being is here's a little laundry list of what kinds of tools are in Integrity Data Hub's tool bag. That really is a very robust system with pretty much everything you would want to know have available to you. And in fact, if you're in the business of trying to prevent identification fraud, ID fraud, this is really a pretty comprehensive list of the things you would want to have in your system. So I mentioned that for what it's worth. You may want to explore that organization and see if it has something to offer you. It looks to me as if it's broad enough that it may very well. But in the meantime, we are going to go to what banks are doing to combat unemployment fraud. And I'm going to turn this over to my little brother, Leo, who, as I said, is the BSA officer and security vice president for his mid-sized community bank up in central Pennsylvania. And he's been, I've been researching this. I've been advising some clients on this and doing a little writing about this. He's been living it. He's not only been talking the talk, but walking the walk. So, Leo, why don't you take it from here and tell us what's going on in the banking world with respect to unemployment compensation fraud.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jim. And the first slide there, as it says, happy days for fraudsters, exactly what it is. Do you know, back on April 6th of 2020, over a year ago, the FBI already had a press release on pandemic scammers already come out. So as you see, soon as the pandemic hit, the fraudsters were off and running. They couldn't have had a better time of it. FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, has identified red flags, and you can actually, if you go into FinCEN, you can see the pandemic and get several different reports out. There's one from July 7th, 2020. They're called FinCEN advisories. There's several out there, give you an idea what's going on and what we've been seeing and dealing with. Okay, financial red flag indicators. Next slide, Jim, please. You can see there's unemployment benefits from states where the customers don't reside. Payments going into other individuals' accounts and not even using their names. What's happening is if you go back, we're talking about slide 9 about the different factors back in the day coming in and cash payments, winning the lottery. Well, the new thing is today is all electronic, and we all have received what we call automated clearinghouse (ACHs). You either pay things with it, you get your credits in your Social Security. If you're collecting Social Security, comes in as an ACH. These electronic fund transfers are the issue that we've been seeing with it. Not just we see some of it with employees, even at the bank, but more so on our customers who are getting involved. They're sitting at home. Everybody's either working at home, looking for a job. Maybe if you lost your job, they're on sites trying to find work at home, or just the old romance scam. If you heard of that, that's the other big one. They're at home. They're getting involved with somebody who says they can, as Jim said earlier in the slide, can get them some quick money. All you need to do is follow this. Well, what's happening is they convince these victims, mules, to give them their entire banking information, including their electronic banking, online banking, if you will. We all probably are familiar with online banking. You go to your bank, you can look at your accounts, do everything online, you can bill, pay, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the mules, the victims, are giving out all this information. And at that point, the fraudsters are taking the account numbers and the information of the victims and easily applying for unemployment. You name the state. There's been $26 billion, and that was a couple of months ago. It's up to $26 billion in unemployment compensation fraud in the United States. Now, it seems to have calmed down a little bit, going back to those slides on those states, because they have reacted. I know Pennsylvania has reacted to help prevent this unemployment fraud, for the fraudsters taking someone else's information and applying for the benefits. and that's a big thing. They cross-check with the labor departments. I know when this first started, one of the big states, our customers here in northeastern Pennsylvania and the Jersey area where we have customers, they were receiving unemployment benefits from the state of Arizona. That was the first big one. We've had customers receive unemployment from, well, I'd say 10, 12 different states. But obviously, the states back then weren't looking. It was so easy to apply. I was going to apply. I went in. And if anybody's from Arizona, I'm not picking on Arizona. It's just the one I tried to myself to apply for unemployment, and I would have been able to get it. I didn't go the full steps, but it was that easy. But now, as Jim has said, they're cross-checking. Before they weren't saying, geez, Leo Castanera, he lives in northeastern Pennsylvania. Did he ever work in Arizona? That he should be collecting unemployment. Now they are cross-checking, but that is what the fraudsters are using. They're getting electronic information now, getting bank numbers and what have you. And one thing I want to mention, we were talking about spear phishing and your employees working at home, perhaps. What we have seen quite a bit of is what they call business email compromise, BEC for short. And what's happening is employees are working at home. They're not protecting their information, confidential information, or maybe they used a personal email instead of a secured work email at the time. And the fraudsters have hacked into this and have intercepted emails that weren't protected. And at that point, they're off and running, and they're creating their own emails, making it appear that it came from your employee, or even worse, could be somebody higher up in your organization, in your business. I've seen them, CEOs already have their email compromised and thinking that they're sending information out to their wire department or somebody to transfer money when it's not really them. So you have to be aware of these business email compromises. And the best thing is, if you ever get an email from somebody, whether it be one of your clients or someone within your own business, you want to make sure and contact them to make sure that wasn't a fraudulent email before you start sending money. Because once the money's gone, it's gone. Jim, next slide, please.
Okay.
So you have all these red flags. What we tried to do as a banking institution to watch for all this ACH fraud that has been coming through. We've worked with our IT department. We worked with our ACH and debit and credit card departments to create files that would help. Usually we did it first thing in the morning because most of this happens during the evening overnight period, and we get these files. And my department would try to review the files and look to see, we see unemployment benefits, and we see the state of Kansas, so we see the state of Idaho. Boom, we're gonna flag that customer's account to see if he had any kind of identity theft or if he was a victim of being a mule again. So you have to work with the other departments, I guess is what I'm saying is a very important thing. New customers. If you have new customers, we see at the bank, they're opening accounts, very similar to what Jim said, where they'll even use an empty address, an empty house to create unemployment fraud. They may even go as far as opening a new account at a bank in that area to tie everything in so they can either get the ACH in once the account's open, get that ACH into their account, or like Jim said, they can sit at and watch just to see if they're going to get something by mail and get a payment in. So the fraudsters are very smart at what they do. At any kind of any way they can do it, they'll do it. But it's very much electronic. You need to work with the other departments is the key. Jim, next slide. I want to touch on virtual ATMs. We've seen that the problem we're seeing now, and if you haven't seen it already, is virtual currency. Bitcoin, of course, being the renowned one as far as virtual currency goes. Two problems we're having. We have business customers, of course, who have now virtual currency ATMs to go along with the regular cash ATMs. So they'll be accepting business as a customer, as your client. But then we also have the fraudsters taking advantage of our mules, who are now asked to send any money that the victim receives from the fraudsters into their account, to transfer that money out back to the fraudsters, so they cover their tracks much more easily. It's harder, and it's a difficult situation with virtual currency. It's just even the Fed now doesn't really have a great handle on it, and we're looking forward to get a little more information on how we're going to be able to follow this currency. But they have the ability to know about these Bitcoin ATMs, and they'll tell the victims, just, hey, get the money we sent you out of your account and take it to send it to us, to a wallet, to our whatever account number they give them, and the money's gone. It's untraceable. So you have two problems. Like I said, you want to be sure if you have customers or clients, if you have for some reason have virtual currency ATMs, you need to be aware that there could be fraud going through them. It's a difficult thing to trace at this point, but you need to be aware of it. Okay, next slide, Jim. I guess we'll go to. I want to touch base on suspicious activity reports.
Right, there we are.
You got that? This is
yes.
The people I'm talking to, you may or may not be involved in suspicious activity reports, but they're highly confidential. And the FinCEN, Financial Crime Network, once again, is emphasizing it's very important. If you see unemployment compensation fraud, you need to report it to the federal government so they can keep track of it on their end too, because the FBI obviously is inundated by this. There's so much fraud and so much money, as I said earlier, lost. We had one customer, you saw some figures up there before. We had one customer get $75,000 from one state in unemployment compensation fraud. Well, we need not only for the individual, our customer needs to report this to law enforcement and make sure that this information is getting out there in these figures that we're showing you earlier. But you need to file a suspicious activity report in some times, and you may not be responsible for doing it yourself, but you may be in a finance world where you have your security or what we call bank secrecy departments that need to follow up on these reports to make sure that the federal government is aware of any activity has gone on in your business. Now, this suspicious activity report has special items from FinCEN that they want you to note when you do file it, and that's what's concerning all this COVID fraud. And what we want to do is look at, again, it's a FinCEN advisory, and it's February 24th of this year. Gives you all the instructions. But if in a czar, you need to put a filing note, institution note, whether it was COVID-19 unemployment compensation fraud. They want you to type this information in the meat of the czar as well as the narrative of the czar. They want you to add if it was a mule, was it someone who got involved in unemployment compensation fraud / romance scam because he thought he was on with somebody, that he cared about, or maybe it was work at home. Like I said, work at home is a big thing now. I've seen, actually, I just want to mention quickly that we've had people actually receive a small business loan, and they're just individuals. Some of them were even senior citizens. So it's affecting everything, the SBA as well as the states, which we're talking about mostly here. So when you file the suspicious activity form,
should I go to the next slide?
Yes, you may. In the narrative, you want to talk about this. You can see the COVID-19, FinCEN, yada, yada, yada. You can see you need to put that stuff in there so they understand that this is a COVID-19 situation or some kind of fraud, because there's so many of them. Next slide, Jim.
Okay.
You got your far field, fraud, other says. It's all self-explanatory. And if anyone, we don't we didn't add the czar for you to look at. But if anyone's interested, you can contact Ty, and I'll send him a copy of the czar form for you that you can look up and be available with. But you need to be aware these have to be filed. This is how they're tracking all these numbers that we're talking about, including the state. At all points, you need to touch base with law enforcement as well as the federal government. Next slide, Jim.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so working with your information security department, I mentioned this a little bit before. This kind of can go back to situations where email addresses, IP addresses, all that is very important if you have any kind of unemployment compensation fraud. If you can get the IP address, needless to say, that is huge for law enforcement. So there's the different areas are very important that you fill them in and as much information as you can. And I want to say again also for a lot of businesses that work at home, I was talking about the business compromises with the emails and all. It's very important if you have any compromise with any of your employees that you work with your IT department, that they can follow up on this information and see where these IP addresses and these email addresses that where they came from. So it's very important that you work with your other departments. Next slide, Jim.
Okay, I think we've made it through those, and I want to. We're into our final piece of the program now, and probably the most pertinent one for most of you who are in with us today. Because I'm guessing most of you are HR professionals, HR compliance officers, and now we get to the final question of the day, and I think the most important one for you: what you should be doing. And I'm going to begin. I'm going to borrow some wisdom from SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. What they are suggesting that every organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, I should think, would want to be doing with respect to battling unemployment compensation fraud. So it's not rocket science, but then again, it's probably not something that we necessarily think of or that comes trippingly to our tongues if we don't have kind of a list in front of us of what we might be doing. And the first one is so obvious but so important: be alert. So, this is a communication piece of advice, really a best practice in the communication realm, informing your employees about the spike in fraudulent claims and asking them to report fraudulent claims as soon as they become aware of them. If you become aware of a claim, an unemployment compensation claim, one of the things that you ought to be doing in HR or wherever it is that you handle unemployment comp claims is making sure immediately, is this a current or a former employee? If it's a current employee, that's a red flag, a pretty obvious one right away. So you can pick up on the fraud very, very quickly simply by making sure when you get a claim, is this a current or a former employee? If it's a former employee, then at least we have an initial indication that this could be a valid claim. If there is an instance of fraud and you pick it up in HR or wherever in the organization it's picked up, you and the affected employee should be working together, as Leo suggested. This is a cross-disciplinary, a cross-department challenge. You need to notify the state agency that hands out these unemployment comp benefits, and you should be notifying local police. This is a crime, and it's not something that's simply an administrative hassle. It is an actual crime, and local police should be brought into the picture. SHRM recommendations number 2, assume that if you're dealing with a fraudulent claim, we could very well be dealing with a much broader case of identity theft involving that employee or former employee of your organization. So that individual should get some guidance as to how to deal with the identity theft. So it's a bigger thing than unemployment comp. And I think, Leo, in talking about when financial institutions, for example, file a SAR, a suspicious activity report. I noticed it in his presentation just a few minutes ago. He just kind of glided almost seamlessly right from unemployment comp right into the topic of identity theft more broadly. And I think that really implies exactly the point I'm making here, that if we have unemployment comp fraud, we probably have a case of identity theft going on here. And there are things that that employee of yours or that former employee ought to be doing. One is filing a report with the Federal Trade Commission. Very, very important thing to do. Secondly, requesting a credit report. And under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, Equifax and the other big credit reporting agencies have an obligation to provide that report to the employee upon request. And then requesting that those agencies post fraud alerts or put a credit freeze on. And what I would do if I were that employee, and what I would advise your employees to do, is with respect to their credit cards, all the areas where they are involved in credit transactions, is take action to get an alert put on those credit cards or to freeze those cards, whatever makes the most sense, depending upon what kind of incursion seems to be occurring as we gather more information, as we get a little bit more savvy about what's going on in this particular case. There may be other steps, as that fourth bullet point suggests, there may be other appropriate steps that need to be taken in order to combat that identity theft. And for those of you who have been through it, either personally or with your employees, you know that this can eat up a year of your life. This can really take a lot of time and a lot of energy. The sooner you get on it, the better, which is why I'm really emphasizing here, and I think Leo was really implying as well, that it's so important to assume that this is not just an isolated incident of unemployment compensation fraud, but there probably is a broader identity theft that's going on here. And that takes me to my next slide, and my next point is to consult with your IT department, because not only should you be concerned for the employee that this is a broader case of identity theft than just unemployment compensation fraud, but by the same token, this may be indicia of an intrusion into your IT system. So I'm especially concerned, there's still a lot of at-home or remote or teleworking that's going on. We're gradually bringing our employees back into the workplace. Some of you maybe are farther along or less far along with that. And I know we've had many, many employees. I've done a number of webinars on the issues involved in, employees who are reluctant to come back into the workplace, who are arguing, hey, we did a great job from home. We're still performing all the essential functions of our job from home. Why not leave us at home? But I think we're in a new normal here, where there is going to be more teleworking, more remote working on a more permanent basis, partly because employees have tried it and they like it, partly because employers have tried it reluctantly, but found that employees actually are as efficient or sometimes even more productive than when they were in the workplace. For all those reasons, our IT is hanging out there somewhat more exposed than it was when everyone was working at workstations in the workplace. So what I think SHRM is getting at here, and what I am certainly suggesting, is that if you have a case of UC fraud involving one or more of your employees, don't overlook the possibility that your own internal systems have been compromised as part of that IT scam that is affecting that employee or that group of employees. When you do become aware of a fraudulent UC claim, there are actions that you are in a position to take. So if your organization receives a favorable determination from your state agency and you know it's fraudulent, file an appeal and request a hearing. I promised you way back at the beginning of the hour that I would talk a little bit about the process of unemployment compensation claims. Many of you may be aware of it. Some of you maybe have not had an opportunity to deal with unemployment compensation. But typically what happens is the employee, the former employee, I should say, will go to the appropriate agency, the local office, and file a claim. You will then receive either online or through the mail a request to confirm or deny the fact that this individual has lost employment for the reason that she is giving for that loss of employment. If you respond, yes, that's exactly right, we laid this individual off, or this individual was let go for poor performance, fine, that's kind of the end of it. She gets her benefits, you get dinged on your experience rating, and life goes on. If, on the other hand, you respond, no, this is not a valid claim, or it may be a claim, but we fired this person for willful misconduct, for example, we don't believe that she is entitled to unemployment benefits, then typically this is bumped up the line to an unemployment compensation referee. And back in the day, I can remember when I was with Saul Ewing years and years ago, we would oftentimes appear in a hearing room or the referee's office and have a hearing on the record there. Now, especially with COVID-19 and the pandemic lockdown situation, but even before that, I was seeing more and more such cases being handled by telephone hearing or maybe by a Zoom hearing. And then there's always the possibility of the losing side bumping it up the line once more to some sort of an unemployment compensation board of review. And many states even allow these cases to go to court. They don't often go to court, but they sometimes will go to court, especially if you have a work stoppage, for example, a union situation, and you don't believe that those unionized employees who have been on strike are entitled to unemployment compensation. And the hit to your experience rating is going to be very, very substantial. You may very well take that into a courtroom situation. My second bullet point here, if an employee receives an IRS Form 1099-G, and Leo, why don't you tell us very quickly in a minute or two what we're talking about with the 1099-G and unemployment comp fraud?
Well, basically, 1099-G is used for people who collected unemployment will have to pay taxes on it. Is basically what it comes down to. 1099-G is used for a few different things by the IRS. The bottom line is, what if a individual receives, one of your employees or any individual you may know receives a 1099-G form related to unemployment benefits, and they weren't receiving the unemployment benefits, obviously they had identity theft at this point, as we mentioned before, they should contact the state or states where the unemployment supposedly was coming, the benefits were coming from, and ask for an amended 1099-G form at this point, okay, from the IRS. This way they have proof that they did not receive the funds. But the bottom line is, out of nowhere, someone receives a 1099-G and they say, I wasn't collecting unemployment. It's identity theft. And two things I'll add while we're talking about the 1099-G. Not only is it showing that it's identity theft, I want to refer back that the credit bureaus, as Jim said, are required annually to give you one free credit report when there's identity theft, or you need to watch your credit report. And that site is annualcreditreport.com, annualcreditreport.com. That's where they need to go. And also, if you don't already, you should have an ID theft policy in place because whether it's employees or whatever organization you're with, you need to have something in place that everyone's aware of what procedures, as Jim was talking about, how to follow those procedures and make sure each department that needs to be involved in this identity theft is contacted and involved in this step. But anyway, yeah, 1099-G, Jim, you can go on the next slide, but that's a sure sign if you're not collecting unemployment and you receive one.
Okay, so, and then the last item on my slide here is if you receive an information request related to a fraudulent filing, best practice is to have your employees send a letter via a method that allows for tracking. Notice the word tracking there. So you're gonna work with your employee to help get this thing resolved. And you want to create a paper trail. You want to have a record of what it is you did and when it was done and by whom. And I'm giving you here an example of a letter that employee might be provided with in order to make that information known to the state agency. And we don't need to go over this now. We're very near to the top of the hour, and I think it pretty much speaks for itself. But I know you get these slides as a takeaway. So this is a good example of how you might help your employee who is the victim of or potentially being victimized by UC fraud to sort of get that cleared up with the appropriate state agency. And the last thing that we're going to touch upon here is just some other organizations that provide software packages that help you deal with fraud. And none of these are we endorsing. None of these are giving us Leo or I any payment for doing it. I picked them because I know they're reputable agencies. I know they're big companies. They've been around for many, many years, and they're not going to be going away and no longer supporting the software or what have you. So Thomson Reuters, huge company. I'm very familiar with it. I've done some writing for them because they're very big in the realm of law and legal research and so forth, as well as business news. So they have a program that they market, that they license, which you might take a look at if you feel that you do want to get into the realm of software to track unemployment comp issues in your organization. Another one is SAS. I'm sure we've all heard of them as well. Their unemployment fraud detection software, and give you a little bit of a definition here, description that they provide on their website. And of course, you've got the URLs here. And then last but not least, ID Me is that they are also a good organization to check as far as I can tell. I noticed the first bullet point there, the NIST 800-63-3 standard that they claim to meet. That if you meet this standard for privacy purposes, you really that means you're up to snuff, and that's one of the reasons I picked them to also mention on our presentation here, because if they've got that kind of seal of approval, they're probably a pretty reliable organization from which to license that software. Again, if it's something that is of interest to you. And that's about it. I think we've covered pretty much fruit to nuts, stem to stern, or the waterfront, pick your cliche. And I know that Ty is going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions, if not right now, then via email, and we'll be sure to make sure you get your answers. And with that, we'll turn it back to Ty and let him kind of wrap up for us here.
Thanks, guys. A lot of good information and guidance there. And there are a handful of questions, so I'll just get to one or two of them right now. First question, has any state considered allowing employers to report when a person leaves a company? That way it is verified when we know it is related to true loss or fraud.
I have not heard of anything like that. Leo, have you heard of any state that's doing that? Gone that far?
No, and I actually, being in Pennsylvania and about New Jersey some too, but in Pennsylvania I have scoured that site and talked within the group. We have a group of banks, credit unions, and we also get law enforcement involved. We meet monthly now. We Zoom monthly, I should say, instead of face-to-face. But law enforcement in particular was looking at that too. What information can the states put out there in a case like this to show that information? And I know Pennsylvania hasn't developed that, and I'm not aware of any other state.
Yeah, it does really sound like a great idea. One could be a next step. And I'll guarantee you one thing, and now that you put this idea in the back of my mind, I'm going to be sensitive to it. I'm going to be watching for it. I'm on the websites, or rather on the email lists of many major Philadelphia law firms, and I'll be watching for any kind of alert that this is happening. If Leo's thinking of it and his organization is talking about it, and you the questioner out there also are thinking about it, I'm sure many others are, and maybe it won't be too long before we see that happen. It just seems to make so much sense, especially when we have such robust IT we're kind of in a situation where it's almost like an arms race between the fraudsters and the terrorists on the one hand, and we with the white hats on the other. And that sounds like a really good next step to kind of get out in front of them a little bit more.
Yeah, the problem is that the states are just catching up on stopping the unemployment fraud coming in. People applying for unemployment. They've been so involved in that over the last 6, 8, 10 months, whatever, that they haven't taken that next step, which they probably will eventually. But I think they're just overwhelmed, as is the FBI. I talked to a couple of FBI agents, and they are doing the best they can, but basically it has to be in the 100,000s before they'll reach out to see what claim you may have put in.
Yeah, it's a question of resources, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Very good question.
Individual business or the Fed. Yep. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, very good question and very good responses. Hopefully it is on the priority list for the states. So we'll get to one more question before we wrap up here. In the public sector, we have seen a rise in claims also. Is having contact information of employees on our website increasing the risk of fraud?
So this is on your public facing website, I'm going to assume is what you're saying?
Yeah, like a directory of employees with their picture, email address.
Yeah. The pictures. Go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Leo.
Okay. Well, it really goes back to having your whole site secure. I mean, worst nightmare would be if the bank customer information, our core was hacked into. Can you imagine the problems there? Now, we do have pictures of our employees within our organization that is just for our organization. The bottom line is, if you're putting that information and you're making it more readily available, you have to be sure that it's secure, because you are putting yourself at more risk, obviously, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know in higher ed, and I spent my last 23 years were spent as in-house counsel at a university, and there's always we're always so wide open. I mean, you can go to I was at Rider University over in New Jersey, and you can go to the website, and I can go in there and I can find all kinds of policies and the collective bargaining agreement and just on and on and on. Is all on the public facing portion of the website. And with respect to employees, I've seen universities deal with it in a variety of ways. Some will list the names of the employees, their titles, possibly a photograph, and then an email address, but nothing more than an email address. And that I certainly would not go farther than providing an email address for employees. It's also the same thing with the social media. Every university wants to have a Facebook page and probably a LinkedIn page and probably a Twitter account. And we're all trying to sit on that fence or walk that tightrope to try to keep the balance between, we want to be out there marketing, we want to be showing that friendly face. So when prospective students and their parents come to our website, for example, and we go to academic affairs or we go to student life, and we want to see all these friendly faces who are working there, and we want to know a little bit about them. And if we want to write and ask a question, we want to have an email address. At the same time, trying to protect individuals' privacy and avoid identity theft and avoid fraud. And in a sense, you can't really quite have it both ways. And to me, when you're in an organization like higher education, and you really do want to be out there presenting that friendly face to the public, it becomes so crucial, as Leo just suggested, to have a robust set of policies, of IT procedures, and so forth, to detect and combat identity theft and other forms of fraud immediately, because we are between the devil and the deep blue sea, the rock and the hard place. I love my cliches. I apologize for that. But really, the image here I'm trying to create is we do have to do business. We cannot be. I once had a health and safety director who I said, if we all drove around in Humvees and the speed limit was 20 miles an hour, nobody would ever get hurt out on the road. But the point is, we have to also conduct commerce. We can't let that tail wag the dog. I hope these comments are helpful to you, and best of luck with that.
Thanks again, guys. On behalf of HR Morning, I would like to thank everyone for attending the webinar. This concludes our program.